はい、で今日ですね、また引き続き詩編のシリーズ、をやっていきたいと思います。
Okay, so with that, we'd like to just go back into our series that we're doing on Psalms for the message.
詩編のシリーズ、7月中まで、終わりまでやっていきます。
And so we're going to basically be doing it till like the end of this month, the end of the 7th month.
はい、今日はですね、詩編の131編、全部見ていきたいと思います。
So today we want to look at Psalm 131, the whole entire psalm.
はい、すごく短い、詩編ですけども、もう本当に素晴らしい内容、ね、濃い内容がみっちり入っています。
So saying the whole entire psalm, that just means the three short verses that it is, but it has a lot of just really great content in this verse that we want to look at today.
はい、では日本語だけでいつも通りですね、読んでいきたいと思います。英語の方はスクリーンの方を見るか、自分の聖書を開いて、読んでいただければ嬉しいです。
And as always, we're going to be reading in Japanese only, so if you're an English speaker, you can either follow along on the screen here or in your own Bible.
はい、このように書いてあります。都のぼりの歌、ダビデによる。主よ、私の心はおごらず、私の目は高ぶりません。及びもつかない大きなことや苦しいことに私は足を踏み入れません。誠に私は私の魂を和らげ、沈めました。父離れした子が母親と共にいるように、父離れした子のように、私の魂は私と共にあります。イスラエルよ、今より常しえまで主を待ち望め。はい、今日この聖書箇所から満足すること、満たされること、そのような内容について話していきたいと思います。
So today from this passage, we want to talk about the idea of being satisfied or being content.
はい、今日2つのポイントしかやりません。
And today we're just going to be going through 2 points.
まず最初に満足できない状態、なぜなのか、その問題について見ていきます。
So the first point is just the problem of discontentment. Why are we not satisfied?
そしてじゃあ本当の満たし、本当に満足することっていうことはどういうことなのか、2つ目のポイントでやっていきます。
And the second point is, what is true satisfaction? How can we actually truly be satisfied?
先週ルカスのメッセージで私たちの心を吟味する、私たちの状態を探って、そして主に望みをかける、置くってことを学びましたよね。
So if you guys remember from last week, we learned from Lucas's message how we need to examine our own hearts very closely. We need to see where we're actually putting our hope in and learn how to put that back into
詩編の
Jesus.
42編でそれを学びました。
And that was from Psalm 42.
その生き方、ライフスタイルっていうものはどういうものなのかっていうものがある意味ここに現れていると思います。
And I think that the lifestyle of what that actually looks like is kind of revealed here in this psalm.
クリスチャンの生き方は満足した生き方です。英語で言うと contentment、要は十分である。自分の、願望や自分の野望に振り回されない生き方だと思います。
I think that the Christian life is really a life of living with contentment, living with a sense of being fulfilled, where you're not just constantly being thrown around by all of these different desires that you have.
私たちが満足について勘違いしていることいくつかあると思います。
But I think there are a few things that we misunderstand about what being satisfied
ま
actually
ず最初
is.
私たちがよく満足することに関して勘違いしていることは、満足するイコール周りの状況、外側の状況によって満足できる状態になるって思っていることです。
So I think the first thing that we kind of misunderstand about contentment is that we think that it's basically affected on our external surroundings, and if all of those things are in place, then we can be satisfied.
お金があれば、
If we have enough money,
良いカウチ、ソファーがあれば、
if we have like a really nice couch,
私が求めていることが全て整っていれば、
basically if all like the specific things that I desire get all kind of lined up and fall into place.
いい仕事があれば、
If I get a good job,
いい教会があれば、
if I get a good church,
友達がいいやつなら、
if my friends are really good
夫
people,
がこういうふうに、妻がこういうふうに、また子供たちがこういうふうに変われば私は満足する、コンテンツ。そういうふうに思ってしまいます。
if my husband becomes like this, if my wife becomes like this, if my children were these kind of kids, then everything would be great and I'd be satisfied.
でもダビデはまず最初に自分にこういうふうに言い聞かせています。セルフトークをしています。私の心は高ぶっていません。そういう言い方をしています。
But David actually, when he starts this psalm, he's actually kind of talking to himself, doing this self-talk, and basically saying like, my heart is not lifted up.
要は私たちの不満足の状態というのは心の状態だということが分かります。
I think we can see from this that the idea of discontentment and not being satisfied is actually a heart condition.
いやいや、ちょっと待ってくださいって皆さん言うかもしれません。
But you might be like, oh wait, hold on a second.
ね、仕事の環境が悪ければストレスたまるの当たり前ですよね。
Like, isn't it obvious that if I don't have a good workplace, then I'm obviously going to be stressed out by
ね、
that?
周りの状況がしっかりしないと私は絶対満足できませんって思ってるかもしれません。でも本当にそうでしょうか？
So you might think like, okay, well, obviously, like if I have all these external circumstances that are bad, obviously I'm not going to be satisfied from that. But is that really true?
皆さん創世記戻ってみましょう。創世記の2章3章、アダムとエバの話。
So let's go back to Genesis with the story of Adam and Eve, especially in Genesis
ア
chapter
ダム
2.
とエバは完璧な世界にいました。
So they were in a perfect world.
完璧な仕事、完璧な神様との関係、完璧な人間関係ですよ。
So Adam and Eve, they had literally a perfect job. They had a perfect relationship with God. They were in a perfect world with perfect relationship with each other.
満足してました。
They were satisfied.
でもなぜか2章から3章になって状況は変わってません。外側の状況は変わってません。でもいきなりとてつもなく何かが欲しくなって食べてはいけないっていう実を食べてしまうようになってしまいました。
Yeah, but then all of a sudden in chapter 3, it's like this exactly the same external circumstances. All of the things remain unchanged, yet they just start to suddenly have this deep, just craving desire for just this other thing that came out of nowhere.
悪魔の嘘によって自分の見る目、自分を見る目、また周りの環境を見る目、特にこれを食べちゃいけないって言われていた実の見方が変わってしまったわけです。
Basically, from this little lie that the devil told them, the way that they looked at things, the way that their eyes and their hearts saw the world completely changed, the way that they looked at everything, and especially at the fruit that they were looking at.
神様に頼ってしまったら、神様を信頼してしまったら、ベストもらえないんじゃないか。神様何か隠してるんじゃないか。そういう不安に駆られたわけです。
You know, they started kind of getting this anxious feeling of like, maybe God doesn't have the best in mind for me anymore.
ある意味、ダビデがここで言ってくれているのは、私たちの不満の原因はプライドだって言ってます。私の心は高ぶっていません。要はプライドの話をしているわけです。
And this is basically going back to the idea of pride. And David kind of talks about that here, where like being not satisfied means your heart is very just kind of high and very haughty rather than being not lifted up and satisfied.
エゼキエルの28の2節では悪魔の態度のことを言ってます。こう言ってますね。私は神だ。海の真ん中で神の座についていると言った。あなたは自分の心を神のように見なしたが、あなたは人であって神ではない。要は私たちが高ぶってしまうとき、プライドを持ってしまったときに自分自身を神の立場に置いている。それが問題なんです。
So it also says this in Ezekiel 28 verse 2. It says, because your heart is proud and you have said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of the gods, in the heart of the seas. Yet you are but a man and no God, though you make your heart like the heart of a God. So it's basically saying like when we are not satisfied, when we are making our hearts very lifted up, and it's like this very trying to make ourselves like God, and that's basically the essence of pride.
私たちが自分自身を全部コントロールしなくちゃいけない。自分自身のすべてのために物事を動かさなくちゃいけない。そのように不満に駆られたとき、プライドによって私たちは自己中心さになっていきます。
And because when we're constantly driven by this kind of dissatisfaction of like I have to make things this way, I have to control things this way, we basically it becomes this very kind of prideful and self-centered way of living.
すべての物事を自分のために見始めるんです。
Because you start to look at everything around you as something that is basically there for you.
この仕事は自分を満足してくれるだろうか。
Like this work, it basically exists to make me satisfied.
この結婚は自分を満たしてくれるだろうか。
Like this, with this wedding, it's there to satisfy me, right?
この子供たちはいい大学に行っていい行儀いい子供になって自分を満足させてくれるだろうか。
Like these children are here. I have these children so that they can go to a good school, they can become really successful, and they can become very polite and just good citizens in society.
この教会は自分が聞きたい教え、自分が欲しい環境を与えてくれるだろうか。
You know, this church is here to give me the good teachings that I already wanted to hear in the first place and to really kind of put me in a good environment.
全部自分のためです。
Like they're all just ultimately for ourselves.
それはプライドなんです。
And so that's pride to think like that.
要はダビデ3節歌ってます。とこしえに今からとこしえに神様に望みをかけろ。要は状況や時代やその人生のシーズンに流されているわけじゃないんです。私たちの満足は永遠に神様にあるってことを言ってるわけですよね。
But David is saying, like in verse 3, he says, "O Israel, hope in the Lord from this time forth and forevermore," saying that basically the idea of being satisfied is not something that's specific to a specific time period, but it kind of is something that goes on forever.
なので心の問題です。満足できないのは皆さんの心の内側の状態です。外側じゃありません。
And so the idea of being satisfied, like true heart satisfaction, is your heart. It's not based on your external world.
そしてもう一つ私たちが勘違いしていること、それは2番目のダビデは目の高ぶり、私の目は高ぶっていません。そういうふうに言い方をしています。
And then the second thing that we kind of misunderstand about satisfaction is, especially where it says, like, my eyes are not raised too high, this idea here.
はい、もう一つの勘違いは満足するイコール期待を下げる。わかります？または英語で言うと自分の願望やそういうものを諦める、妥協するって思ってる のが私たちの勘違いです。
And the other kind of misunderstanding we have about trying to be content is that, oh, we're kind of lowering our standard to something that's more attainable. We're just kind of compromising and giving up on what we actually wanted in the first
希
place.
望を下げる、それで自分を満足させようっていうのは間違いです。
Where basically it would be wrong to think that, well, we just need to lower our hopes and just kind of just like try to go after maybe something that's not such a high standard.
ああ、私よりもっと貧しい状況にいる人たち、もっと貧しい国の子供たちがいるじゃないか。だから今の持ってるもので満足しよう。そういうふうに私言い聞かせますよね。
You know, we always try to convince ourselves like, oh, well, you know, there's other people in other countries that are way worse off than I am. So like, you know, it's fine. Like, I could probably still get by the way I am because other people have it way worse than I do.
考えてみてください。ダビデ王は王様でした。王。
So yeah, think about it for a second though. Like David, when he wrote this, he was a king.
王様としてビジョン、人生で国のために理想を求め、要は今の状態で満足しちゃいけないわけですね。個人的にもまた王様としても。
Like he is in this position where he has to think about all this like kind of really big picture stuff for the country that he's ruling, like all of this like vision for the country, but he also has to like be satisfied in that as a king, but also just personally.
No, he shouldn't be.
He shouldn't be satisfied with like this current state of affairs. Sorry.
言ってる前から例えば皆さんダビデゴリアテを倒しました。でももしダビデがいやペリシテ人に襲われてるけどもまあしょうがないよね。これ神様が与えてくれた状況だからまあいっかって態度出したらどうでしょうか。ゴリアテなんて倒してませんよ。
Yeah, so for example, like the story with like David and Goliath, if David just had this approach of like when Goliath is coming and they're attacking Israel, just be like, oh, well, like maybe this is God's provision and I just need to like accept that. And like, oh, well, like, okay, like, is he going to be able to defeat Goliath if that was his stance?
満足するイコールまあしょうがないじゃダメです。または楽観主義でもないです。
Yeah, so being truly satisfied does not just mean like just this happy-go-lucky kind of optimism, or just like, like I didn't even care. I don't care at all. That's
ま
not
た
what
はその状況から目を背けるってことではないです。
Yes.
フルストレーションから目を背けることでもないです。
It's not just kind of avoiding looking at things that are frustrating in your life.
なぜでしょうか。おそらく僕は思うにはこの都のぼりの歌、先ほどね説明しましたよね。都のぼりの歌っていうものはエルサレムに向かって特に神殿に向かってイスラエルが一緒になって一緒に歌を歌うその歌です。
Yeah, and I think this is related especially to like how it says at the beginning of the psalm that it is a song of ascents, which is basically a song that people would sing as they would go up towards the temple.
おそらくもしかしたらダビデは神の神殿または幕屋そういうものを見ながら神様が言ったことを思い出してたかもしれません。
So I think as David was singing this, he was probably as he was singing this, he was probably thinking about this idea of like going up to the temple.
皆さん、ダビデは神のために神殿を建てたかった。そういうビジョンを持ってました。
And David had this vision of like he wanted to build the temple for God.
でも神様こう言いました。それはあなたの役割じゃないって。
But God actually said to him like, no, that's actually not your job.
だから言って、じゃあもう神殿いいやって諦めたんでしょうか。
So did David just be like, oh yeah, you're right. We don't need a temple. You're right. Never
いや、
mind.
ダビデはできる限りの責任準備をしました。
He actually did as much as he could within his responsibility to prepare for that temple
ビ
being
ジョ
built
ン、
later.
理想はしっかりまだ持ってました。
So like he had all of like the vision and all of kind of like the ideals in place of what it should
で
be.
も自分の立場をわきまえてたわけです。
But he also kind of understood his place and where he was kind of allotted.
満足、本当の満足っていうものは理想を掲げながら現状を生きることです。
And so the kind of true satisfaction is you're able to look at the ideals and see what those are, but you're also able to understand kind of your own place and what you've actually been
理
kind
想
of
を
allotted
ギブ
for
アップ
that.
することじゃないです。
So it's not just giving up on your ideals.
夢やビジョンをギブアップすることじゃないで
It's
す。
not giving up on your dreams.
自分の役割、使命を理解することです。
It's actually truly understanding what is your calling, what is your kind of your place and your role.
責任を放棄することじゃないんです。
It's not just giving up any responsibility.
ここで高ぶった目っていう言葉、またちょっと戻りましょ
So let's go back to the part where it says that my eyes are raised up.
う。はい。箴言の21の2と4にこう書いてあります。
So this is how it says in Proverbs 21:2 and 4.
人には自分の歩みがまっすぐに見える。しかし主は人の心を評価される。高ぶる目とおごる心。悪しき者の飛びしみは罪って書いてあります。
So it says, every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the heart. And haughty eyes and a proud heart, the lamp of the wicked are sin.
面白いですね。その目、高ぶった目っていうコンセプトをもちろんプライドとつなげ、もう一つ、目が明るいランプ、光、そのようにつなげてます。
So we have this kind of connection already with like your eyes being connected to like haughtiness or pride.
Sorry, we are still on one point, ね。First point. We are not second point. はい。Sorry.
So we have this idea of your eyes being kind of connected to pride in your heart, but there's also this idea of your eyes being connected to this lamp or like light in your body.
はい、詩編の18の27から20、ここに出てきません。だから皆さんもしよければメモっといてください。こう書いてあります。詩編の18の27、28。はい、誠にあなたは苦しむ民を救い高ぶる目を低くされます。誠にあなたは私の灯火、また光ランプですね、を灯されます。私の神、主は私の暗闇を照らされますって書いてあります。
So there's another example in Psalm 18:27 through 28 where we can also see kind of a very similar wording. We don't have it on the screen, I think, but we will read it out, which is, for you save a humble people, but the haughty eyes you bring down. For it is you who light my lamp, the Lord my God lightens my darkness.
面白いコンセプトですよね
It's。a very interesting concept, right?
面白いことに、アダムとエバも彼らが実を食べた時に何が起こりましたか？
So like for going back to the example of Adam and Eve in the garden, when they actually took the fruit, when they actually ate the fruit, what happened?
目が開かれたってあります。
It says that their eyes were opened.
私たちが欲求不満、プライドを通して欲求不満になっている時に、私たちの物事の見方が変わるわけです。
Because when we're just kind of driven by this deep sense of like dissatisfaction, that actually changes the way that we see everything.
先ほど言ったように、物事の状況に満足できなくなる。
And that becomes like in any situation that we're in, we just can't be satisfied by that situation.
でもそれだけじゃないです。
But that's not the only thing.
イエス・キリストマタイの6章の22、23でこういう話をしましたよね。もしあなたの目が暗ければ不健康なら全身が暗くなります。でもあなたの目が良い、健康的なら全てが明るく見えます。全てが良くなりますって言ってます。
And then Jesus also says in Matthew 6:22 and 23, which says like the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eye is bad, basically your whole body is full of darkness. But if your eye is healthy, then your whole body will be full of light and you actually can function well.
どういう意味でしょうか？
So what does he actually mean by that?
イエス・キリストはここでお金の話をしています。
So in this time, this context of the story, Jesus is talking about money.
その当時、その文化では目が悪いイコール嫉妬心に駆られる。他人が持っているものを欲しがる。貪欲になってるっていうそういう状況の意味がありました。
And the kind of that time period, the eye being dark, the eye being bad, kind of had this nuance of meaning that you were basically envious or you desired other people's stuff and you coveted them.
要はまた欲求不満と同じでなんで嫉妬するんでしょうか？
So it's kind of the same idea of like just being dissatisfied. Like why do we even envy other people in the first place?
あいつはなんで俺が持ってないものを持ってるの？あいつは持ってるべきじゃない、俺が持ってるべきだ。それが嫉妬です。
You know, why does that guy have what I don't have? Like I should be the one who has that thing. And that's basically the whole root of envy.
なんであの人はお金持ちで、そして私はそうじゃないの？
You know, why is it just arbitrarily that that guy's super rich and I'm not?
なんであの人はあんな美人で私は美人じゃないの？
You know, why is that girl so pretty but I'm not?
なんであの人はこれらすべてのものを持っていて、結婚してていい家族を持っていて私はそうじゃないの？
You know, why does that guy have just everything in life and I don't have those things?
プライドです。
It's basically pride.
だからダビデは目っていうコンセプトを指摘しているわけです。
And that's why David is bringing out the concept of the eye.
要はそのように私たち生き始めると、ここで面白いですよね。私の心はそれらに、日本語で何て言ってますか、踏み入れませんって言い方しています。そのような領域に私は足を踏み入れないって言ってるわけです。
And so that's why David actually says basically, like, I'm not going to kind of go about with those things. I'm not going to deal with those things. The actual verse says, I do not occupy myself with those things.
In English, actually, occupy, but in Japanese, says, do not go around about it. ってことで
Yeah,
すね。
this idea of like kind of going around and kind of getting involved, going about all these things.
要は不満足になっていくと、そしてフルストレーション溜まって生き方をしていくと、余計なお世話をし始めるんです。自分の領域を超えて、ダビデのように自分の役割を知るんじゃなくて、自分の役割以上のことをし始めていくわけです。
And this is basically the idea of when you're dissatisfied, when you're constantly being driven by this desire of just not being satisfied, you basically go over your boundaries, overstep your boundaries, and you go into all the other places and you're like trying to just like, I want to help out here, I want to do this too, and I'll do all these things that you're not really your original boundaries that you're
自
supposed to
分
be
が
in.
解決しなくていいことを必死にそれを解決しようとしたり。
Like things that you really don't need to be involved with to help out with in the first place. You're just like, no, I have to be a part of this. I have to be helping out this thing.
教会もなぜあれをやらないの、なぜこれをやらないの、なぜこういう解決をしないの、もうどんどんイライラしていきます。
You know, this like, oh, why is this thing happening in the church? Like, I have to make myself get involved and to be the one who fixes it.
皆さん自分がやりすぎてることなんでしょうか？
So, like, what's the thing in your life that you're kind of overdoing, that you're really overstepping your bounds with?
また野望を持ちすぎてるところなんでしょうか？
Or like the thing that sorry,
野望 to become too
you're
ambitious.
too like just too ambitious, that you're just like way too have intense ambition about.
実はこの詩篇は僕がイギリスにいた時、宣教団体で働いてた時に一番最初に僕の師匠、メンターがくれた、詩篇でした。
And this is actually the psalm that when I went to England, there was this kind of mission school there, and that my kind of master, like the guy who was teaching me, this is the first psalm that he gave me.
僕はその時、イギリスを救ってやる。日本を救ってやる。俺が日本にもっともっと素晴らしいキリスト教を持ってくるんだ。そのような、使命感みたいな変なものを感じてました。
And that's when I really had this very strong kind of mission, kind of passion for I'm going to save England, and I'm going to go back, and then I'm going to save Japan too. And I had this like just very strong feelings about this.
それらいいことですよね。もっともっと多くの人を救いたい、宣教したい、いいことです。
And of course, those are great things. You want to be a part of like global missions and helping like people's salvation around the world. That's an awesome thing.
いろんなアイディア、そしていろんな計画、それを僕の先生といつも話してたんですね。俺こういうことやりたい、ああいうことやりたい、こういうことやりたい。もうそういう話になってました。
You know, I was always talking with my teacher about all these like, oh, look at what about this idea? We could do that. We could do all these things. And we talked about all these great ideas.
そして先生がリューター詩篇の131編読んでみろよって言ったんですね。
And basically, my teacher said to me like, hey, Duta, I want you to read Psalm 131.
読んでみました。なんかすごいすごい予言みたいなのもらえるのかなと思って読んでみたら、っていう感じだったんですね。
And I basically read it and I was like, oh shoot, this seems like almost like a prophecy for like where I'm at right now.
I thought, first. But when I read it, like, okay. I understand what you mean.
Yeah, thanks.
高ぶりすぎてたんです。
I was basically I was just too lifted up, too haughty in that
自分
moment.
一人で何かできると思ってたんです。
So I thought I could do all these things by myself.
そうなると疲れてきます。
And when that happened, like we got really tired.
クリスチャンの生き方はある意味バランスなんです。もちろんビジョン、ある意味でかい野望を持つべきです。でも自分の役割を謙遜的に自覚して生きる、そのテンションです。
Yeah, I think as Christians, like the way that we live should be very similar, where we have this great ambition for these great things that God is doing, but we also kind of have a humility to know what is like our boundaries and what is the role that we have.
理想だけに行ったとき、私たちは貪欲になります。自分の願望に振り回されます。
Because if we focused only on the visions and all of these great possible things we can do, then we basically fall into just coveting and greed and wanting to just do this too much, and we're just stuck with just desiring too much.
でもまあしょうがないっていう諦めに入ったときに私たちは皮肉になります。どうせ期待しても起こらないし。
But then on the opposite spectrum, we just kind of forget about the vision and we're just like, like, yeah, it's whatever, like, it's fine. And then we just get very cynical.
両方ともプライドです。
And so both of these two extremes are pride.
自分中心です。
And they're ultimately self-centered.
じゃあどうすればいいんでしょうか？
So then what should we do?
本当の満足ってどういう状態なんでしょうか？
So what is actually true satisfaction?
それが2つ目のポイント、2節を特に見ていきます。
And that is the second point of the message, which is also we want to look at the second verse of the psalm.
はい、ダビデが 2節で説明してくれていることは2つ言葉が出てきます。私は自分の魂を和らげ、そして沈める。2つ動詞が出てきます。
And there's kind of two important verbs that come out in the beginning of this verse where it says, but I have calmed and quieted my soul.
その最初の和らげるっていう意味はですね、even、英語で言うと even、要は平らにする、レベルを合わせるっていう意味なんです。
And this first one where it says calmed is basically the idea, if you could maybe imagine like a calm sea, where it's like making it flat, making it even and level.
そしてもちろん沈めるっていうものは沈める。って沈めて落ち着かせることです。
Yeah, and then of course like quieted is obviously like calming yourself down, like quieting yourself.
この2つの意味、どうすればそういうふうになれるんでしょうか？
And so like these two things, like what do we actually do to be able to do this, to become into this kind of
ダ
state?
ビデはあるイメージを与えてくれてます。それは父離れした子供のようにって言ってくれてます。
And David gives this really good example of a child that is kind of weaned but still with its mother.
面白いですね。最初これを読んだときに、あれなんで父を求めてるね、母乳を求めてる赤ちゃんじゃダメなのと思いました。
And you might think at first, like, well, why not the image of like a child that is desiring the milk of its mother? Why not that image?
言ってる意味わかります？赤ちゃんの方が ある意味安心してる感みたいなそんなのあるんじゃないかなと思う。なぜ父離れなんでしょうか。
Like you might think like, well, wouldn't it be more kind of this like peaceful, like the child is really just relaxed if they're actually desiring and getting that milk from the mother? Like why is it specifically the image of a child who has already been weaned off of that milk?
実はそこにバランスがあるからです。
And it's because there's actually a great balance in that
父
image.
離れしてるっていうのはある意味自立してる、満たされている。わかります。もう必死にあーあーって泣きながら、母乳を求めている状態じゃないです。
Yeah, so the first one is that if you're already weaned off of that milk, you've already gotten it. You've already gotten that satisfaction. You're in this kind of state of like, I've gotten that before, and you're not constantly like, oh, I need more of it. I need more of it right now. You're not in that state.
言ってる意味わかります。自分である意味食べることはできるかもしれません。ある程度の能力と責任感を持ってます。
And like a child in that state might already kind of have like a sense of a little bit of independence or a little bit of kind of responsibility already.
でも同時に母親の腕の中のように母親の前、要はそれでも母親に頼らなくちゃいけない状況です。
Yeah, but at the same time, this child is still kind of in its mother's arms. It's still, on a certain level, still has to depend on its mother.
要は母乳を求めてるんじゃなくてお母さんを求めてるんです。
And in a sense, it's not desiring the milk from the mother, but it's actually desiring the mother herself.
クリスチャン的に言うとこうです。神様がくれるものを必死に求めるんじゃなくて、神自身を求めるっていう状態です。
And in the same way, as Christians, it's not just trying to desire these things that God gives us, but to desire God Himself.
どうでしょうか。私たちそういう状態いますか。
And so for all of us here, like, are we like this right now?
神自身を求めてますか。
Are we desiring God for Him, for Himself?
それとも神がくれるものを求めていますか。
Or are we just going to God for like the things that He could give us?
神がくれるものだけに頼っているなら、それは私たちの自分の責任、自分のことをまだプライドがある、まだ自己中ってことです。
And if we're really only going to God to give us things that we already wanted, we're really just kind of stuck in our self-centeredness and pride.
ある意味私たちは別の言い方をするとこうです。神に完全に頼りながら、神の主権、神の計画、神の守りに頼りながら自分の責任も自覚する。そのテンションです。
And another way to kind of say this tension is that you're constantly perfectly relying on God, but you're also completely aware of the responsibilities that you have.
難しいです。
And it's a very difficult tension.
そうですよね。だって神様全部計画して神様の主権で要はプレデスティネーション的な考えですよ。全部計画されてるなら別に何もしなくていいじゃんってなっちゃいますよね。
Because there's the one extreme of just like, well, everything is already completely predestined to the every exact detail, so like I don't have to do anything because it's already completely planned.
でも神に頼ることを忘れたら今度全部自分でしっかり要はパリサイ人たちのように自分のパフォーマンス自分でやることに全てかけてしまいます。
Yeah, but then there's also kind of the same way of like thinking about where you're just like, oh, I have to do this all myself. I have to be like the Pharisees, where you're always like, I have to do this. I have to get involved in all these things and do it myself.
質問はどうすればそのバランス、そんな状態になれるんでしょうか。
And so like the question is, how can we actually get the balance between those two things?
満たされながらも神に頼っている状態です。
Yeah, is this balance of like while being satisfied by God, while being satisfied in Him, are we relying on Him and then taking the responsibility for what we've been given?
はい、まず先ほど言いました都のぼりの歌の性質は共同体です。
So as we kind of said earlier, this idea of like the song of ascents going up to the temple is something that is done kind of as a corporate body.
これダビデは自分にただ歌ってるわけじゃないです。イスラエル全体の前でこれを歌ってるわけです。
This is something that David's not just saying to himself, but he's actually saying to kind of all of Israel.
私たちが自分の満足、自分のプライド、自分のフルストレーション、そういうものを解決したいなら私たちはコミュニティが必要です。
And so if we want to really break out of our pride and all these frustrations that we might have with just feeling unsatisfied, being in community is very essential for that.
間違ったものに頼っている自分を指摘してくれる仲間が必要です。
Because we need people who are outside of us who are able to see our blind spots and point out these things where, oh no, hey, that's wrong, you're relying on this thing instead of
人
God.
生の状態、教会の状態に望みにかけるんじゃなくて神に望みをかけようよって言ってくれる友達が必要です。
We need friends who can actually point out to us like, hey, like you need to be putting your hope, you need to be putting your trust into God and into not that thing.
ダビデはイスラエルよ、私の王様に頼れって言いませんでした。
Sorry, can you say it again?
David didn't say, ダビデは私、王様である私に頼りましょう、望みをかけろとは言いませんで
So
した。
David didn't say to Israel like, hey, I'm the king, so you need to rely on me.
主に望みをかけよう。
He's saying like it says at the end of verse 3, like hope in the Lord.
ダビデは詩篇の110でこのように言っています。
And this is how it also says in Psalm 110.
私の主は私の主に言ったって覚えてますか？ Lord say to my Lord.
Yeah, so it starts in verse 1 saying, The Lord says to my Lord.
ダビデは本当の主、本当の王の存在を自覚していました。
Because David knew who the true king was.
自分が究極的な答えじゃないって分かってました。
He knew that he himself was not the ultimate solution to the problem.
イスラエルは自分に頼っちゃダメだって自覚していました。
He was aware that it wasn't just like, okay, I'm the king and Israel needs to just rely on everything that I do.
いや、本当の王に頼るべきだって分かってたんです。
He knew that ultimately that he and all of Israel needed to rely on the ultimate king.
その王を待ち望め、その主を待ち望めって言ってました。
And he said, hope in this Lord, hope in the Lord from this time forth and
こ
forevermore.
の主って誰でしょうか？私たち知っています。
And we know who is this Lord?
それは本当の王イエス・キリストです。本当のダビデ、真のダビデであるイエス・キリストです。
Yeah, and that is the true king, the true David, Jesus Christ.
でもそこに望みをかけることがどう私たちのプライド、そして私たちのある意味心配です。これを手に入れられなかったらどうしよう。その恐れを解決してくれるんでしょうか。
So how does putting our hope in this true king, this true Lord Jesus, how does that actually get rid of our discontentment and all of the things we're worried about?
イエス・キリストは王であったのに、すべて一番偉大なこと、苦しいこと、及びもつかないことも知っている、それに値する人です。
So Jesus is the one who is this perfect king. He is this great and marvelous king who is deserving of all glory and praise.
でも彼は赤ん坊になりました。
But he became a weak and small baby.
文字通り母親に頼りました。
And literally, he relied on his mother.
人の手に自分の身を任せました。
And he literally kind of entrusted himself to the care of other people.
自分に制限をかけ、それでも神に完全に頼りまして、自分の責任は果たしました。でも同時に神に頼り続けました。
And he intentionally put himself into like a limited state, but at the same time, he completely relied on God, yet he also was completely aware of the responsibility that he had.
イエスこそそのようなバランスを持って生きた唯一の人です。
And Jesus is the only one who has lived this balance that we keep talking about. He's the only one who's lived it perfectly.
とてつもない知恵、自覚、すべてを知って自分の責任を知っていながら、私は神の御心以外は何もできません、しませんって言いましたよね。
Yeah, and as he said, like there's nothing that I can do or that I do apart from the Father.
でもそのような存在が私たちのために十字架にかかったんです。
Yeah, but this person, this Jesus, was hung on the cross for us.
そして復活しました。
And then he rose again.
ある意味十字架っていうものはその神様の主権、そして私たちの責任の究極的な形です。
And in a sense, the cross is kind of like the ultimate expression of the sovereignty of God and also our responsibility.
イエス・キリストが十字架にかかることは神の計画でした。
Because Jesus being hung on the cross was part of God's plan.
でもなぜ十字架にかからなくちゃいけなかったんでしょうか。それは私たちの責任です。私たちがイエス・キリストを十字架にかけたんです。
But then, like, who's actually the people who put Jesus on the cross? That was us. We actually hung Jesus on the cross.
私たちの罪のせいで。
And it was because of our sin. And
そこに私たちの責任があります、ちゃんと。
so, like, we can see from that, like, that we do have a responsibility.
でもその最悪の状況すら神様は用いて最高の結果にしてくれる。
Yeah, but even this worst possible scenario, God used that as well and brought it to, like, the best possible outcome.
十字架こそその私たちの責任と神様の主権のバランスです。
And so the cross itself is really this perfect balance between our responsibility and the sovereignty of God.
私たちで私たちの自身を救えないんです。
Because we can't just save ourselves with our own effort.
その十字架を見たときに私たちのプライドが砕かれます。ああ、自分の計画バカらしいと思います。
Because we actually, when we look at the cross, that actually breaks our pride when we see like, oh, my plan was actually really bad.
イエス・キリストは33年ぐらいしか生きずに効果的、誰よりも効果的に生きました。
Yeah, Jesus, like he only lived on this earth for 33 years, but he lived more effectively and more efficiently than anybody else.
神の御心に完全に従うことによって最大限の結果をもたらしたんです。
Yeah, because he completely relied on God to like the fullest extent and brought out like the perfect result for the extent that he was
自
here.
分の使命、自分のやるべきことをわきまえていきました。
And he completely knew and understood his role and his calling.
でも私たちは逆ですよね。いろんな野望、いろんなアイデア、いろんな願望に振り回されて、いろいろやりますが、結局何も生み出さない。
And for
す
us,
ごく効率悪いです。
we're completely the reverse, where we have basically really, really bad efficiency. Where we're like, oh, let's do this, let's do all these ideas. Look at idea, that idea is cool, and then we don't actually do any of them.
自分自身も破壊し、自分自身も安息を得られない、ストレス溜まって病気になって死んでいく、そんなやつらですよ。
And that's basically us, where we're just like, oh, let's do this thing, let's do all these things, and then ultimately it just becomes this very self-centered thing that ends up destroying us as we just go off
め
to
っ
die.
ちゃアンプラクティカルです。全然効率悪いですよ。
Yeah, the way that we live is really not practical. It's like very low
で
efficiency.
もイエス・キリストを見たときに神に信頼できるはずです。あ、神に頼るってこと、神の前で静まり任せるってことは、あ、こういうことなんだって初めてわかるわけです。
But when we look at Jesus on the cross, we can actually see like, oh, this is what relying on God is. Okay, now I get it.
もう一つ解決してくれます。
And there's one other thing that it also resolves for
僕
us.
これ、うちの娘たちが、パパ、フォモだね、FOMO。わかります？フォモって言葉わかります？
So my daughters always ask me hey Dad, do you know
Right?
FOMO? Do you know that
Instagram ちゃんとやってる人は。
FOMO? You guys know FOMO, right?
Fear of missing out。
The fear
わかります？
of missing out.
Fear of missing out というのは、パーティー逃したらどうしようとか、わかります？そういう感覚。あ、なんか僕がいない間になんかすごいことが起こっちゃってるんじゃないか。すごい体験を逃してしまってるんじゃないか。Fear of missing out って言うんですね。はい。
Yeah, so I think some of you guys know the idea of FOMO, where it's just like, oh, that really awesome party, and I'm not able to go. Like, oh, I bet the best thing in the world's gonna happen when I'm not there. It's like that idea.
ある意味、ダビデ言ってます。素晴らしいこと、お呼びもつかないこと。もう Fear of missing out はないって言ってるわけですね。
In a sense, like David's kind of saying, like, I don't occupy myself with those great things that are too great and marvelous. Like, I'm okay with missing out.
でもどうやってその Fear of missing out ね、すべて素晴らしいことを全部手に入れたいという思いを恐れを解決できるんでしょうか。
So how can we actually kind of resolve this problem of constantly like, oh, I'm afraid that all these great things are going to happen without me when I'm not there?
新明記の29、29にこう書いてあります。
And this is how it says in Deuteronomy 29, verse 29.
隠されていること、私たちの神、主のものである。しかし、表されたことは永遠に私たちと私たちの資産のものであり、それは私たちがこの見教えの言葉、すべての言葉を行うためであるって書いてありますね。
It says, the secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things that are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law.
でも良い知らせはこうです。その隠れたこと、
But the
お呼
good
びもつかないこと、私たちにすでに与えられているんです。
but the good news is that these great and marvelous things that we cannot fully comprehend are already been given to us.
コロサイの1の26、28。
And so it says in Colossians 1, 26 to 28.
すなわち世々の昔から多くの世代にわたって隠されてきて、今は神の生徒たちに明らかにされた奥義を余すことなく伝えるためです。この奥義が異邦人の間でどれほど栄光に富んだものであるか、神は生徒たちに知らせたいと思われました。この奥義とはあなた方の中におられるキリスト、栄光の望みのことです。私たちはこのキリストを述べ伝え、あらゆる知恵を持ってすべての人を諭し、すべての人を教えています。すべての人をキリストにあって成熟したものです。に立たせるためです。言ってます。
The mystery hidden for ages and generations, but now revealed to his saints. To them, God chose to make known how great among the Gentiles are the riches of the glory of this mystery, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. Him we proclaim, warning everyone and teaching everyone with all wisdom, that we may present everyone mature in Christ.
神様がすべて与えてくれます。
God has already given us everything.
もう神に信頼したらベストを得られないってアダムとエヴァのように心配しなくていいんです。
Like we don't have to worry like Adam and Eve. Like if we trust in God, like there is nothing that He won't give us. He's going to give us His best.
私たちは何も逃すことはありません。
Like we're not going to miss out on anything.
今日神様に安心、満足してください。
So please, today, once again, find that true contentment and satisfaction once again in God.
そこで知恵を持って生きるとき、自分の願望じゃなくて振り回されるんじゃない、知恵を持って判断して生きるとき、人生が一番効果的になります。
And when we do that, we can actually not be constantly driven by our random desires, but actually through wisdom that God gives us. And that actually helps us to live more effective and efficient lives.